We spent 5 nights this past November detailing how a huge aquifer in eastern Oregon is polluted. It's happening in northern Morrow and Umatilla counties. The state has known about this problem for at least 30 years and taken no steps that have stopped the pollution from getting worse. In the meantime, thousands of mostly low-income people who use backyard wells are exposed to often dangerous levels of nitrates in their water because they tap into that contaminated aquifer. The chemicals can cause several problems, including cancer after long exposure. Nitrates come from 3 main sources: from farming, animal feedlots, and commercial food processors. Various committees have met to discuss the problems for something like 30 years, and each time recommended voluntary changes in those industries to try and stop the pollution. But well testing has shown those steps have failed. The pollution is worse now than when it was first discovered. We'll hear from the EPA in a moment, but first an update. The Port of Morrow is one of the businesses spreading nitrate-contaminated water on farm fields near Boardman. It's not supposed to spread that water during the winter because there are few plants growing to absorb the water, making it easier for nitrates to sink down through the soil to the aquifer. But the port has more water than it can store, so monitoring reports show it appears to have violated its permit over a dozen times in November and well over 100 times in December, spraying 219 million gallons of wastewater on fields around Boardman in December alone. Now, after our stories aired, we wanted to hear from the top environmental regulators. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality is in charge of clean water for our state. We've been asking for an interview with the director, Leah Felden, for 3 months, and now just heard back today that she will indeed sit down and talk with us, and we're thankful for that. We'll probably run a story with her in early March. We've also been asking for the same thing from the regional director of the EPA to see what the federal government says about all this. And this week, I did sit down with that administrator, Casey Sixkiller, to talk about the contamination.
You know, learning about this issue was one of the first things that I was briefed on when I came into this position in 2022. So to be able to go out there on the ground and actually meet with people that are being impacted by nitrates in their water was a really powerful moment. And I'm so thankful that people opened the doors and were willing to come yet again and share their stories and their frustrations. I think, you know, for me, the opportunity to hear directly from people and to see how much this issue cuts across so many barriers, and whether they're economic, cultural, racial, geographic, and you know, there aren't many issues like that anymore where people really can come together and fortunately or unfortunately find community in a shared voice asking for change.
And a lot of those voices that I've heard from say, why can't the government do more to stop the continued contamination?
Well, you know, the way that we've looked at this is in two parts. You know, when I came in and people began to explain to me that this has been a challenge for 3 decades, you know, I said, first and foremost, this is an emergency and we need to treat it like an emergency. And that's, you know, number one, making sure people understand what nitrates in water means and the potential negative impacts to them, to their kids. 2 is understanding the ways in which they can begin to understand the extent to which their homes are being impacted by nitrates. And then 3, having access, of course, to water or filtration or both. So let's deal with the emergency that it is while really beginning to pull together all the different parts of the state and other local jurisdictions to address the long-term issues that we know folks are experiencing out there.
Casey Sixkiller grew up in the Seattle area, and he told me he often spent summers with relatives down here in Vancouver. As he mentioned, he personally visited the contaminated areas in eastern Oregon about this time last year. He told me he is aware the state of Oregon has stepped up its efforts to get wells tested and clean water to folks with contaminated wells in that problem area. Right. And we've seen some movement with notifying people that there might be a problem. The state's stepped up its testing. They've stepped up their water deliveries. But nobody's said anything about stopping the industry from polluting.
Well, first and foremost, you know, that is a decision that really is made at the state level. And, you know,
but if the state's not making it, can't the feds force it? Because you guys have the Clean Water Rights Act and all that.
Well, you know, for us, again, I see this as an opportunity for us to engage in and really explore all the different authorities that we have under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Thinking about what opportunities we have given the bipartisan infrastructure law to actually be part of the solution, part of the long-term solution of delivering safe and clean drinking water to these households, and frankly, holding accountable the state and others. In this instance, though, I am really appreciative of the fact that the state has come to the table. I can't speak for what that interaction was like before I got involved, but I'm encouraged that we now are beginning to see, after a lot of pushing by our agency, to actually have a plan. Not only plan to deal with the near-term issues, right, of testing and making sure folks have access to water, but also a plan to deal with the nitrates that we know exist in the groundwater today, and as you said, the continued application of those nitrates that we know are continuing to have an impact. All of that's going to require some big changes in the way businesses conduct their business, changes in the regulatory environment, or creating a stronger regulatory environment at the state level. But again, folks feel the fire. And I don't know if that's because we send some pretty strongly worded letters to the state or not. I'd like to believe it's because people are agreeing that after 3 decades, it's time to get the job done.
But people have been saying over those 3 decades, yes, this is a problem. Oh, yes, this is terrible. Oh, yes, we should study it some more. And it becomes 3 decades later. Is there any assurance that 10 years from now, we won't be having the same conversation?
Well, I don't know about the time frame in terms of when a very complex solution will be able to come forward, but I can tell you this, and it's the same thing I told the community members when I had the chance to meet with them. We're there now, and we're not going away. And I like to think of myself not as an impatient person, but when I see things like this, it's really important that we are transparent and that folks have an ability to hold us accountable. So, this is not a situation where I think we can wait another 3 decades. It's not a situation where we can wait another 10 years.
The Oregon Health Authority reports that a total of 424 households tonight are getting regular deliveries of clean bottled water paid for by taxpayers. Sixkiller said EPA enforcement officials are now meeting every 3 months with Oregon leaders, talking about what is being done to fix the situation. He told me he will not be satisfied until the problem is solved, but he is encouraged to see movement from the state.